Good evening, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Welcome to our first clinic of the 2024-2025 Into the Deep season. My name is Patrick Michaud. I usually go by Patrick. And for those of you who are new to First Tech Challenge in North Texas or new to this series, we do frequently these different online seminars and workshops or as we call them, clinics, where we will get coaches, team members, and experts together to talk about new developments in First Tech Challenge, partially as it applies to North Texas. There's definitely a North Texas focus to much of what we do, but it's also generic. So if you're coming from another region, either in Texas or somewhere in the United States, then we welcome you and welcome to join our fun environment that we have here. With me tonight, we have several people representing North Texas, and I'll just introduce them briefly. I don't have slides for the introductions like I often do. So first, let me just shout out to Lon Cherryholmes. He is the Program Delivery Coordinator for North Texas. Lon, are you active?
Yes, I am active. I'm here for my fourth year as program delivery coordinator for the North Texas area. I'm excited about the clinic tonight. I think it's I tried to get you guys excited about the upcoming Into the Deep game. And I told Patrick and Erica, do you want to do a webinar when the new game manual comes out? And they were like, absolutely, no questions asked. So we've been chatting about the new game manual or the competition manual since yesterday, and we are excited. And we wanted to make you guys excited too. Moreover, I would like to say that the first 2 or 3 pages of the game, the competition manual, you got to get used to saying competition manual, guys. It's all about gracious professionalism. That's the program we're in. A lot of these rule changes have to do with gracious professionalism, by the way. And Patrick will touch on that shortly, and Erica too. And this is what FIRST is about, is that gracious professionalism values. If you're not into gracious professionalism, y'all can go do VEX instead, okay? If you're here in this program, you're here for FIRST. You are here for the values and the fun and our core principles that we will be following tonight. So I'd like to thank Erica and Patrick for hosting this meeting tonight. Learn something.
All right, and so with that, let's go ahead and I'll just invite Erica to say hello as well. Erica has been working diligently with me since even before the game manual was released yesterday to put together tonight's clinic. So Erica, say hello.
Hello. I'm really excited for this new season. Um, I literally have been like itching for the manuals to come out. And so it's been an absolute pleasure to be working with Lon and Patrick on the slides that we're going to be presenting to you this evening. Just in advance, there's a lot of change. If you have not already looked at the early release competition manual. And so there will be a lot of questions. I still have some myself, but if you have questions, we have a panel of amazing individuals. I'll put myself on that side too. But we have a basic understanding of what's going on with the manual, and we're here at y'all's disposal. So we're opening it up so that this is a learning opportunity for better clarification and understanding of the competition manual, because it's a lot. It's a lot, both good and good. I won't say bad, but good. Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, good and maybe less good or still questionable, or we still have questions, one might say. So thank you, Lon and Erica. So again, for those of you who are new, the way these work is these are pretty unstructured. We have a presentation, we have slides that we're going to go through, but as you have questions, just please feel free to either unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can, especially with this many people, you can enter something in the chat. And we have several people that are watching the chat, and we'll be able to get to your questions as we go. In a lot of cases, the question you ask may be handled by something later. The other thing that I wanted to start off with today is to recognize that when we prepared this, it didn't occur to me until just before I started the clinic. We may actually have a lot of new coaches here in this, and new people who are new to First Tech Challenge, and definitely welcome. You're going to discover just how much fun it is and how much fun we have working together in these events, in these competitions throughout the season. But if you're new, a lot of what we're covering today is changes from the manuals that have happened in previous years, because the game manuals, as they were called previously, have been fairly consistent for the last 5 to 10 years in terms of what was in there. And part of why we're doing today's clinic is because the competition manual, as it's now called, is significantly, it has some significant changes, things that many of us have been hoping to see for many, many years, for quite some time. And so that's part of why we're having this. So a lot of what you're going to be hearing about today is really changes from what veterans already know, but I'll also try and just spend a little bit of time here at the beginning as we introduce the competition manual to go through it and give you a sense of what's there. One of the things that I think I should probably start with, and let me see if I can get this. I'm still learning a new interface here for some of the different things that need to happen. So I'm going to try and share my screen. And do this. Let's see, where's the share screen button? Where? Oh, there it is. It's the big green one. All right. So first of all, a question that we didn't put in the slides that probably needs to go there is, where do you get the manual, the competition manual? So I'm gonna just start with that first, and I'll just say the way that I do it. So the way that I do it is to start by, I just do, you can bookmark it, of course, but I typically just do FTC game and season as a Google search term. And that usually takes me to the First Tech Challenge game and season page. And then from there, that's the standard place where you can go. And then I'll go to game materials. That's the standard place where you can go to get the resources that you need for each season's game. Now, if you go there tonight, as we are right now, you'll see that the very top link is what we're going to be talking about tonight, the competition manual, and this is where you would go to get the competition manual. And then there's various materials and other things, but there's still links here left over from last season, and that's pretty normal for the summer, that it takes some time for First Tech Challenge to update all of the documents. Many of the documents are embargoed until the kickoff date, which is September 7th. That's the date when all of the details of this year's challenge are released to teams and coaches and volunteers in First Tech Challenge. And so until that happens, you'll see a lot of links that are for last season's game. But the important thing we're talking about today is the competition manual. It's a PDF file that you can download. One thing that is very, very different from previous seasons is that now it's just one manual, and you'll hear many of us lapse into talking about Game Manual 1 and Game Manual 2 because for as long as I've been in First Tech Challenge, which is 11 years now, it has always been Game Manual Part 1 and Game Manual Part 2, and now it's just a thing called the Competition Manual. So that will be definitely of interest to people as we go forward. And I'll go through some of the bits about what the manual has in it here in a moment. But let me just grab some slides real quick and go back to my slideshow. Let's see, but unfortunately my window is the wrong window. Let's get this correct. There we go. All right. And I'm gonna spotlight my video real quick just to make sure everybody can see this okay. All right, so let's just start with, first of all, if you're in the Zoom chat, it's really nice if you would go and put your team number in as your name. And the way you can do that is right-click on your name in the participants window, and you can rename yourself. And that just lets us know when we see a question come in, then we kind of know what team you're with, and it's always good to be identifying with your team. So if you get a chance to do that, that's really helpful, and we would appreciate for folks to do that. The next slide that I have just gets right into it. So for those of you who have been around and talking about the game manual, I just wanted to start with my top line impressions and takeaways and the things that are kind of the overview, what to expect as we go through today. So my first impression, having seen the new competition manual, is that this is really a welcome update to the whole manual ecosystem and the way that rules have been published. I've heard little bits and pieces from different people over the summer about things that might be coming in the new manual and some changes that might be coming to First Tech Challenge. And having now seen it, I'm really, really pleased with what they have so far. I think it's welcome changes. There's a few things that I have questions about, but that's normal. And for what's been given to us thus far, it looks really good. There is a lot more still to come, not only the game rules, but there are still sections of the manuals that haven't been filled in, and we'll see what those are here in a second. The biggest change that we'll talk about here in a little bit is the Q&A forum changes and a team updates format, which we'll cover right off the bat because it's pretty big. Another big change for people who have been around for First Tech Challenge is and this is a fairly significant change, is that there are now expansion limits on the robot. In previous seasons, robots always had to start inside of an 18-inch cube, 18 inches on a side. But now there are restrictions as to how far your robot can grow on the field. Previously, there weren't any restrictions. And as many of you know, the team I coach came up with a robot a couple of seasons ago that literally took that to the limit and created a robot that could literally stretch the entire width of the field. So it's kind of interesting that we're now looking at those expansion limits, but I think it's a welcome change. I think it will make the game more exciting and better overall. There's some changes to the way that team numbers and alliance markers take place. And the other top line impression I had is just how much improvement there has been on the things surrounding the robot electronics and control system. And we'll go through quite a few of those here, and I've got some bullet points there, but I'm not going to cover them in great detail to begin with. So before I go, Erica, anything you wanted to add at the outset, or Lon, or any of the other North Texas Volunteer Committee have any comments they want to add?
Nope, just if you're a veteran team, come to the manual with an open mind. It is a lot of change, but it's going to be for the betterment of both us as volunteers, students, and coaches, and as the event as a whole.
I totally agree with that. All right, so let me go to the next thing here with just an overview of the competition manual. So the competition manual itself is divided up into sections now, and these sections are quite good. These are the 16 sections that are in the new competition manual that was just released, and we're going to go through some of these here in a bit more detail. But section 1 is an introduction. Section 2 is an overview of the first season. Section 3 is what's called the eligibility and inspection rules. Section 4 is the advancement rules, and so on down the list. Now, one of the things to note about the manual that was just released is that many of these sections are empty, and they say that they will be filled in on kickoff day in September. And so if we want to see which sections are present, the ones that are here highlighted in white on the July 31st release, these are the sections that exist in the competition manual where we can see some of the changes coming down the pike. So many of the things we'll be covering today are things like the event rules and the robot construction rules are the places where we are probably going to have most of our focus today. I was hoping that we would get to see some details about advancement and judged awards in this release, but they haven't got it in the release yet. I think that's fine for the breadth of changes that First Tech Challenge is undertaking and the amount of change that they're doing in the manuals. The fact that those sections aren't yet complete doesn't surprise me too much. And so I'm hoping and I expect they'll be complete by the time we get to September when the season officially gets there. But I was kind of hoping that we would be able to share whatever those are going to be with you as well. But it looks like we'll just have to wait for September until there's another competition manual release. So much of what we'll be doing today will be covering these specific sections. If I go to what the manual actually looks like, it's a PDF file that you can download. I'm going to switch over to the competition manual itself and see what it looks like. Let me first start by making it smaller, making it fit on a page. So the manual as it exists now is 75 pages long. That's quite a bit, and especially considering that a lot of the sections are just 2 pages of, this space intentionally left blank sort of thing. So it's pretty long, but when you download it, you can just go through the PDF file. I will blow up the text here because I'm sure it's not easy to see at this small font size in the Zoom call. We'll blow up the text here in a second. Actually, let me just go ahead and do that here real quick. There. So you can see the introduction. As Lon said, definitely take a look at the first section if you are new to First Tech Challenge, or even if you have been around for a while, just to kind of see what's different. One of the things that I know that the volunteers have talked about in North Texas and indeed in Texas this season is we really want to return to a strong emphasis on the notion of gracious professionalism and cooperation between teams. Many of us who have been around for a long time in North Texas, we remember days when there was a very strong camaraderie between teams in North Texas, working together and things like that. And that's not to say that it's absent or that it's missing, but we would like to see a focus, a return to that focus again. So definitely look at some of those features that are there. Then you can see there are different groups. Sections 3 and 4 are waiting for September, but you can see there's a section on event rules. There's a section on the arena, the game details and the game rules. All these game sections will be filled in September. Robot construction rules are somewhat filled out and so on. So we'll be covering these different sections through this different thing, but it's just a PDF file. It's something that we encourage coaches to read. We encourage team members to read. Definitely get your team members to read. And from one perspective, it's really nice that there's just one manual that you have to look at, and we don't have to remind people to go and read Game Manual Part 1 because everybody is busy focused on Game Manual Part 2, which had the rules and things in it. So let's go on here. Section 1 point, just a minute, I need to open up a window here for myself. So give me a second to do that. Just a second. All right. Just to begin with, one of the things that has changed significantly is the way that the rules are referenced in the First Tech Challenge manual. And again, this is something that I really like. And for those of you who have participated in the first robotics competition, or FRC, in the past couple of years, you're going to find that the new First Tech Challenge manual really borrows a lot or takes a lot from the way the first robotics competition or FRC manuals do, and that includes the way that rules and conventions get numbered. And so I'll just go through and talk about the rule numbering method and things, because we're going to dive right into some of those as we go along. And each section has letters for the rules in that section to help remember which rule it happens to be. So rules that have to do with inspection all start with the letter I. Rules that have to do with how an event is run start with an E. The game rules will start with a G. Robot construction rules start with an R, and so forth. And so these letters are the first piece to being able to do the rule numbering method. And then if we go from there and look at the actual rules, and where you see these white boxes in the slides that I'm presenting, those are screen captures straight out of the manual. So these are things that you can find within the manual. But rules that are numbered, and that gives us a shorthand reference to talk about a particular rule or reference, is always one of those letters followed by a 3-digit number. The first digit following the letter tells you what section or subsection it happens to be in, and so it's a very quick way to be able to check those. And the last 2 digits will tell you what is the order of the rule within that particular subsection. And so that ends up being a very useful shortcut whenever we're wanting to reference a rule. And so, like, you might be in a match or something like that, and somebody will say, you know, what penalty did I get? And you might actually hear a referee or a head referee say, well, you got like a G410 violation. And that G410 it refers to a number. And then if you ask, what does that mean more generally, they can usually expand on it. But we often talk about them in terms of shortcuts to be able to understand what the rules are. So this rule numbering method, I am a FRC head referee. I have been for many years. And when they started using this system in FRC, I thought it worked really well. So I'm very excited to see it coming forth to FTC as well. Every rule, when you look at it in the manual, has something called a headline. And so I just pulled as an example R307, which is about if you're using what are called commercial off-the-shelf components or COTS components. And you can see that the headline here is COTS should be single degrees of freedom. It's just a shorthand note that we can use just when we go and see a rule number, we can go and look just at the headline and say, oh yeah, that's what that rule is about. And then after the headline is the actual text and details of the rule. So the headline is an abbreviated version of it. Furthermore, the headlines are color coded. So you'll see that they have a color with them. And I think they also have an asterisk if they're the first type, if they're the green type. And rules with a green headline are what we call evergreen rules. So these are rules that we expect, or that First Tech Challenge expects to be largely the same from one season to the next. So I would expect that in next season, even 5 years from now, that the rule headline for R307 and the rule R307 is going to be pretty much the same as it is in this first manual. In this manual that's coming out. And so those are the things that tend to stay the same from one year to the next as we go on. So that's an evergreen rule. Other rules that appear in the manual will have orange headlines, and that means they are likely specific to that season. Certainly most of the game, I won't even say most, but a lot of the game rules will be very specific to the challenge that is set forth for that specific season. And so you could tell something about the headlines. Another thing to note about the headlines is that when you see a headline or whatever, there will be times, or there can be times, where the headline and the rule text don't precisely agree. And I picked R307 because I think this would be in that case, right? In this case. Whenever you have a headline where the text is not the same, then the question becomes, well, which one is the correct one? Which one is the correct rule interpretation? And this is documented in the competition manual. The rule text is always the authoritative statement, whatever is in the text of the rule, not the headline. So in this particular case, you can see it says COTS should be a single degree of freedom. And I, as a team member or as a coach, could read that word should and say, well, it just says should. It doesn't say it has to be a single degree of freedom, right? It just says it should be a degree of freedom. So maybe there's some wiggle room for me to bring in a commercial off-the-shelf component that has more than 1 degree of freedom because the headline only says should. But if you look at the text of the rule itself says must, right? It says that these components and mechanisms must not exceed a single degree of mechanical freedom. And so because that is in the text of the rule, that is the absolute standard. And so if you were to take this to an inspector or to a referee or to a contest official who is saying you can't use this particular component because it exceeds the 1 degree of freedom rule, you would not be able to use the headline as a way to make your case, because the text is very clear in this particular case. So that's one of the things that happens with rule headlines. Again, coming from an FRC background, sometimes those little conflicts show up, and we just have this very blanket statement that the text of the rule is always the controlling factor. All right, next. Team updates. And Erica, you had said you were interested in doing Q&A, or did you want to do team updates, or do you want to do both?
I'll do the Q&A since I'm most excited about that one.
All right, I will let you do Q&A, but don't go to that slide yet. Don't go to that slide yet. I hit the wrong button. All right, so team updates. This is something that I'm also super excited about for this season. It's been used for every season that I've worked with First Robotics Competition. Again, for those of you who have been around in First Tech Challenge for a long time, then you know that we have had the game manuals that would come out, but then there would also be what's called the Q&A forum, which we'll cover in a second. But the rule on the Q&A forum is that if somebody asked a question in the Q&A forum and there was an official answer that was posted from First Tech Challenge, the Game Design Committee, or an official answer given to those questions in the forum, then the Q&A forum took precedence. Now that's going to go away. And what's going to happen instead is all changes to rules will take place in the competition manual. And that will happen through what are called team updates. So what happens for a team update is that every 2 weeks or every other week, every other Thursday, starting after kickoff day, at 1 o'clock by 1 o'clock Eastern, the First Tech Challenge will publish a team update, and that team update will contain a summary of all of the things that have changed about the rules since the previous team update. And so instead of having to go through and search through a long list of possible rule changes, now you can just do team update. And so the team update will look like these that are here. This is an example that I pulled from FRC because we don't have any team updates yet from the FTC competition manual. But you can see kind of what they look like. So there's a section that tells you what section the modification is taking place in. After that is the text of the rule, and you are given both the text as it was before and how it is now. Anything that is being removed from a rule is being crossed out or strike through, and anything that's being added to the rule is being added by being highlighted in yellow. And so for G409 here, you can see in FRC, they changed the wording to make it clear that to get rid of the word have crossed and make it to instead of have completely crossed, it became are completely across. Similarly, in the next rule, you could see that there was a there that was modifying speaker as an adjective, saying which speaker, and they said, no, that needs to be a speaker. Those were game things, components for the FRC game this last season. But that's what a team update looks like. So you don't have to reread the manual every time, every 2 weeks. You don't have to reread the whole manual looking for changes. There's a guide that is produced. It's called a team update that is basically your summary. These are the things that changed. And so every change that takes place in the manual, you can just look at the team update since the last time you looked at it to see what changed and if anything interests you. All right, and then we'll go to Q&A, and I'll let Erica talk that one.
So I am notorious for Q&As. There's typically 200 plus, almost 300 questions every season. And it's really hard to filter through all of those and find which rules have overridden the game manual. And this year, the Q&A no longer supersedes the manual. So that's where we get these amazing team updates where you as teams have easy access to it and you don't have to go and do what I do every Thursday night before events start happening and filter through all of them. So I'm really excited about that. So there's still going to be questions asked on the Q&A. So these are still a resource for teams and coaches and even especially volunteers, especially if you're reffing, to also read as well so that you're up to date on what's kind of happening with, the rules and what questions there are. So again, they're only guidance and discussion aids. They are not superseding. They are not official rules. So they actually in the competition manual gave us some examples of good questions and things that might not be answered. Some of the good questions that they've added in are features of parts or designs of your robot or mechanisms, rule clarifications. Again, remember, it does not supersede. I know that this season somebody will walk up to me and say, but the Q&A says, and then I will say, but does team update say? And that's going to be a bit of a change from past seasons. One myself that I'll have to adapt to, but happily, if I don't have to filter through 300 questions and answers. So they also added in some questions that might not be answered, specifically rulings on vague or hypothetical situations. The game design committee typically does not like answering the what ifs. They like the hard, yes, this is what it is not, because being vague it's really hard to get a good answer on something like that. So, or review or challenges of decisions already made at events. I understand that it can be very frustrating, especially if a head referee calls something that is not in your favor. And then if somebody answers it somewhere else and you feel a little like justified of, no, they were wrong. The game design committee won't be answering that on these Q&As. What I would do if that occurs is talk with your head referee at the event before, event is completely finished so that you can get as much information and clarification as you can. And then something else that might not be answered is design review for legality. Something that's really cool about this game manual is that it's very straightforward. And so if you read it, quote, if you read it, you know it. So everything in the game manual will be there at your disposal. And it'll also be really awesome at events to ask your key volunteers for clarifications if you're still having a little bit of trouble in understanding.
Cool. One of the things that I know we're also focusing on this year is we really want to increase the interactions that the volunteers have with students, with team members and coaches at the events. Again, that's something that we've all very, very much valued, both when, for those who are first alumni, they often talk fondly about their interactions with volunteers who made a difference to their thing and so forth. And so I'm just going to echo, since Erica mentioned it, definitely, feel empowered to go and ask questions because, not necessarily in a challenging or oppositional way, but, all the people who are working these events, it's certainly in North Texas. We encourage questions. We want to have these discussions. We'll spend hours talking about the nuances of different things that are there, and we really, really enjoy it. And so we'll get there. Before I go on, there's a question that came up in the chat. So let me just take care of that question, which is, does the measurement in the specified in diagrams that appear in the game manual, do those overrule what's present in the text? And I'd have to go back and look at the manual to see if it actually specifies about diagrams versus otherwise. I would tend to think that the text overrules the diagram, but those are also candidates for things that get fixed really quickly. Like if there's a disagreement between the diagram and the text, then it's almost certain that somebody will notice it and it will be fixed in the very next team update. And the other thing that's going to happen is that team updates will start occurring long before competitions do. So there are a lot of people who will go through the competition manual and they'll notice all these little errors and inconsistencies, and they'll ask questions on the Q&A forum saying, hey, on this page or in this particular section, it says that the distance is supposed to be 9 inches here, but the diagram shows 10 inches. Which one's correct? And there'll be a team update that comes out pretty quickly that clarifies that. So that's usually not going to be an issue that's there. And before I go on to our next section, which is going to be robot rules, I'm just going to open it up. Just take a moment to say, does anybody have any questions? You can unmute, you can pop in the channel about the game manual that's there. I like to always just insert pauses in what we're doing. First of all, to take a breath, but secondly, to say, hey, if you have something that you want to ask, then please feel free. But if not, then we'll go back to looking at the next part, which are some of the robot rule updates. So the robot rules are in section 12, the robot construction rules. And the robot construction rules they're such a big part of the game and the game challenge because you have, see if this works. No, okay. Just because you have, these are the rules that describe what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do with your robot. And so that's a really important feature. And the robot rules that were in previous seasons, I'm going to put my guess as to what happened in previous seasons, which is that in previous seasons, I think that what's happened is the robot rules and all the rules that were in the manuals, they became kind of this agglomeration of things that changed from year to year. And so what this manual is doing is it's giving the First Tech Challenge game design committee and the people who put all the rules together a chance to really revisit everything that's happened and look at that again. I'm going to go speaker view so that you're not just looking at text. I think it's been a really good chance for them to take a step back, take a global look and say, what is it that we really need to have happen? And also, I'm just going to say, because if you're not aware of it, there are plans and expectations that I think 2 seasons from now, in the 2027 season, there will be a new control system that will be coming out that will radically change the way things are doing. And many of the rules seem to me like they are already positioning themselves and planning for the days when those new control systems are introduced and preparing for that. So I think it's really a good chance, for them to establish this, but also kind of look ahead. And for people who kind of read between the tea leaves, some of us may stop and think, oh, this is about to happen. Okay, and so we'll find people who may want to do those. But let's go through and look.
To give some context to the next section you're about to talk about is that there are other robotics competitions that they give you a kit and they say you can only use what's in this kit to build your robot, and that's it. What makes FIRST amazing and why it's a great robotics program is you get to make your own custom-made parts and you get to make your own mechanisms and your own designs and your own CAD files. So the whole reason for this lengthy section that he's about to talk about is to give guidelines on what you can do with a FIRST Tech Challenge robot. So these rules, even though they might seem confining, are actually way more broad and more open than other robotics competitions.
Yep, I totally agree with that. That's a really important point to add is that I mean one of the things that as a coach and my teams have always we really like exploring the boundaries of what we can do with the robots, and the rules are our first stop that we go to, which is, are we allowed to do this or not? And the restrictions that are there, they have good reasons for being there. I've never found a rule restriction that I completely disagreed with, except if it was like a minor thing or something like that. But most of the rules are there, either number one, and most importantly, safety. Number two, to make sure and ensure that the game is fair and interesting and accessible to teams overall, and not trying to avoid having an unbalanced playing field depending on the backgrounds of the teams that are coming in. So really good reasons for having those. All right, let's look at some of the robot rules and let's see where we'll start with. So I'm going to start with a big one that I mentioned already, which is the horizontal expansion limit. And you can see the text of the rule here. Again, if it's hard to read on Zoom, that's fine. You can find it in the rule. It's rule R104. And in previous seasons, the rule had always been that your robot had to start out at the beginning of the match, fitting inside of an 18 by 18 by 18 cube when you started a match. But once the match began, your robot could expand without limit, or the limits were basically the perimeter boundaries of the field. You couldn't extend beyond the perimeter boundaries of the field. But that meant that robots could become fairly big. And we've seen that in the past couple of seasons where there have been robots that made wild, very, very long extensions where they could occupy large segments of the field. And what I can say is that for robots that did that, first of all, it gave them an advantage in terms of being able to score because they could reach things more quickly, and that's a good thing. But the end result of that expansion was sometimes that they would end up blocking the opponents from being able to do things as well. And that's not really been in the spirit of First Tech Challenge in the past. Nobody likes a game where nobody can score, right? I mean, it's the offensive moves, it's the scoring that really makes things interesting. And so if you're designing a robot where part of the purpose of the robot is that you have this very long extension that you're using to simultaneously get something, but the side effect of that is that it makes it really hard for your opponents to show what they can do. That's not a desirable thing. And so there've been talks about, especially after a team in the power play season, my team, created a robot that could literally had arms that could expand the entire width of the field. They were over 12 feet long at their maximum extension. And we didn't use those for defensive purposes. That was never the intent, but it still could have the effect of preventing robots from getting to where they wanted to go in order to score points and things like that. And so since then, and especially also with other things that happened this last season with long extensions, either in the intake process or in the scoring process, there's been some discussion in the background among different people, like maybe we should put some limits on it, and that's what appears to have happened this season. So the limits that are there, let me go back real quick, is that your robot can grow as tall as you want it to be. There's not a vertical limit to how tall it can go, but there is a horizontal limit, and your robot cannot expand any wider than 20 inches and any longer than 42 inches, right? And so that's basically, if you're used to looking at the field, that's basically the space occupied by two of the floor tiles. Each floor tile tends to be about 23 inches. So it's a little bit, it's about two floor tiles, a little bit less, but that's the approximate distance that you can be. And so that really restricts down now the amount of field space that a robot can use. Something that's important about this, though, is that that's the maximum space that your robot's allowed to have, like in the extreme. It's not in the moment. So, for example, many robots would have a long extension that would extend out forward to be able to go and pick up a game element. And then it would bring it back to the robot, and another extension would go backwards in order to score. And the question of 20 by 42 is not how does the robot look at any instant in the match, but how far can it mechanically reach? And one of the things you have to be able to do is to show during inspection that if you do have these long extensions, that in the total, if everything was extended as far as it possibly could be, that you would not violate this boundary of 20 by 42 inches. They give in the manual some pictures of things that are okay and other things that are not okay. So the left column here is examples of robots with extensions, where in the first case, the robot is fitting within the 20 by 42 space just fine. But on the right-hand side, the next example that is there, that's a robot that has an extension that can go forward, and that when the robot has that extension going forward, from the robot to the extension is 42 inches. And then if something else can extend backward, then it has violated this particular rule, and it would not be considered a legal robot. Same thing for things in different orientations and the like. So what teams will have to do this season that I think is, again, a significant change is you have to make sure that whatever robot you build, when it expands, it doesn't violate these constraints of 20 by 42 inches. There is an interesting note that exists in the game manual, which is that game-specific exceptions might be added. So even though this is a general rule, it's a general rule, and notably now that I see this, this is not even an evergreen rule. It's an orange rule, which means it could change from season to season pretty easily. But they do allow for the possibility that there are game-specific exceptions that are there. So that especially for teams that have been used to designing and thinking about we're going to reach way across the field in order to grab a scoring element or to score something. Now you have a very significant limit to that. All right, so there's more examples there. We'll talk about them more through the things. All right.
You recommend
next,
that the teams have like a program in their robot to just make it do everything extreme so that it can be checked during inspection?
yes, that would be a really good idea. Or just be sure that you would be able to mechanically, if your robot was off or something like that, just stretch everything to its maximum extension so that inspectors can verify that it's going to be there. I'm curious to see if events will create like sizing boxes on a table or something, where there's kind of a taped out area that is the distance, and to see, so that it makes it easy for inspectors to check to see that it's not violating those extension rules. That is something we might see going forward as well.
And I know it was already asked, how will this be checked during inspection? Technically, no hard set way, but it does give guidelines, and I've posted that in the chat. Thank you, Reza, for that. But it should be interesting. I think taped out areas will be the best way to visually see if, a robot does violate it.
Right. It might be interesting to see if we could have a taped out area that also doubles as the sizing cube. I mean, that they work together somehow. That would be interesting.
Nice.
But something to play with as we get into the season when we're not busy studying the manual. All righty. Let's see here. So, all right, let's go on to the next one. The next one is a new thing about team numbers. And Erica, you said you would take this one, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. So we have new numbers. So out with the circle and square. Now it is number plates in a way. So some really key points about this is that there are new rules regarding this. And of course, we're sticking with the numbers are displayed on two sides. I believe it's a 90-degree angle. But some key features about this is that signs must be at least 6.5 inches wide by 2.5 inches tall. So there is a set size that the plate itself needs to be, along with how tall it should be as well. Included in this is how tall the numbers themselves need to be. And so for teams that have really small numbers, 3-digit, 4-digit, you don't have to fill out the whole distance. As of right now, it could change, but you can have a number off to the side and have maybe the logo. And that's even an example inside of the manual itself. But most teams have, the 4-digit, 5-digit numbers. And so those will be the ones encompassing the full number plate. Thank you, Patrick, for this one. And so, one, we have official confirmation that the numbers must be robust enough to be taken on and off of the robot, because instead of the circle and square, your team plate is now identifying your alliance color. So I just read in the chat, are these plate rules different from last year's? And if so, how? So yes, they are very different from last year. Your team plates are now replacing your alliance markers for those veteran teams. Alliance markers were the items that were the markers for your alliance, blue circles and red squares. Now it is the number plate itself that will be displaying which alliance you're on. And so sign background of these will be either red or blue. Sorry, I get distracted reading the chat as well. And so they're going to have to be robust enough to handle gameplay, because this is identifying you as a robot on field and who your alliance is. Some other things is that I know, especially in North Texas, we had a whole bunch of alliance markers that were reversible. So one side would have a blue circle and the other would have a red square, but they would have it in a slot, and I could see both of the reversible disc from either side. This time in the manual, it specifically says if you have a number plate that's reversible, you cannot see the other side. So if you're Blue Alliance, I should only ever see blue number plates on your robot. And then the numbers themselves must be at least 2 inches tall. There are some instances of if a team does not have the resources, that's when you work with your key volunteers at the event, so that we're not going to prohibit you from playing just because you don't have the right kind of numbers, but we will be there to work with you to make sure that you are competition ready. And so individuals like myself as a head referee might be able to make an exception, and then highly encourage you to come to the next event with the appropriate tags. Thank you. So Patrick has just, shown the little segment of the rules that says a head referee can give you a thumbs up for, the accidental. I drove 45 minutes and I don't have the number plates. I'm so sorry, Erica. That has happened before. But so on this next slide, Patrick actually came up with some interesting workarounds for the rules for the number plates, because it doesn't specifically say it has to be in a rectangle. It just says that the total width must be 6.5 inches. And so if you're also noticing that none of the numbers are stacked on top of one another, so it can't be a 1, 2, 3, 4. They have to be placed next to one another. That's explicitly stated that your numbers can't be stacked. So just keep an eye on that, especially teams that have used their numbers for many years. My old FTC team did the same thing. So it's going to be a little bit of a change for them, but I'm excited about it. Nova also pointed out that the number plate can also be greater than 6.5 inches. And the wording must be at least 6.5 inches. Thank you, Nova, for that. And so there's another commentary about what about diagonal? Again, we're probably going to ask some more clarifying questions about how can we wiggle this rule around, because having numbers on a robot is also for the aesthetics as well, rather than just I'm on the Blue Alliance. And so we want our bots to look good as well as, be functional. But at a diagonal, so far we're going with the width itself must be at least 6.5 and at least 2.5 tall. So we'll get a little bit more clarification on it. Okay.
So it's been really interesting to me. I'm going to stay on the number plates just for a second,
Yeah,
because
of course.
even as I was doing these examples, my first set of examples, the numbers were black instead of white. And then I went back and in discussions with other people talking about these examples, it actually specifies the numerals have to be white, right? So there are some other little things that can trip somebody up. And I was just playing with it because it's like, rectangles are boring, right? And so I was just thinking, what are different ways that you might choose to display something other than a rectangle? But I think it's a fair question. This question was asked in the chat. Might First Tech Challenge like change the rules and say no, the plates have to be rectangular? And I think the answer is they possibly could. I'm not sure that they imagined that anybody would do some of the things like that are here, that are listed here. I think they just assumed everybody would do rectangles and so on. And so it could very well be that they go through and say, "Oops, we need to add a rectangular requirement," right? And then the question about can it be diagonal? I think that's another thing where as teams come up and are creative, and again, there are so many people within First Tech Challenge up and down the line who love the creativity. And then they decide, is that a loophole that we want to encourage, or is it one that we need to close? And so it'll be an interesting thing, I think, to see what happens with the numbers there. But
Yes.
yeah, the two on the right were where I was really trying to say, let's get out of the basic shapes and just say what else can we do here. Um,
And
uh, Go ahead.
sorry to interrupt. I also want to reiterate that these are your alliance markers now. And so somebody was like, hey, does that mean we're replacing them every match? Yeah. So you're going to have to be able to easily exchange, your blue ones for your red ones. And so that means you need two number plates red, two number plates blue. So put your 3D printers to work because you're going to need a lot of numbers for this upcoming season.
And then to answer the question that I'm going to remove the spotlight here and go back to this.
Of
To answer the question that Joe Varnell asked. Hi, Joe, by the way. For those who don't know Joe, Joe is the first senior mentor emeritus. He has been in FIRST programs longer than I have. And so I'm really glad to see that Joe is able to join us tonight. But he asked, no more doing paper and Sharpies like we've often done at events in the past. And I know Erica and others immediately, once they saw this rule, they came up with, we need to have red and blue paper at the events, right? So that we can do that. And there are also some other possibilities that could come up that I'm sure will be coming down for, you get to an event and for whatever reason your team member is deemed to be not following the rules, that there will be on-site ways to fix that if they are so egregious that they need to be fixed. Overall, I kind of like this approach, other than a couple of other things. So, but the other thing I wanted to just note while we're on the subject of team numbers is they seem to be clamping down a bit on your ability to use LEDs or to illuminate the numbers, because many teams would like to have lit numbers, that were lit on the sides or illuminated in some way or fashion, and so forth. So if you're instantly thinking, I'll do numbers and then I'll use colored LEDs behind them in order to change my alliance indication from either being blue or red, that's not going to fly. So definitely check the rules out very carefully on that when doing that.
Yes, I know in the past we've gotten some really cool acrylic numbers that were, like the edges were lit up. And so that's going away sadly. But that does not prohibit you from still having those, but they won't be your main identification.
Okay, let's see here. Let's move on. And the other thing I'll just mention real quick. Let me go back to speaker mode here. The other thing I'll just mention real quick is, like, we're covering some here tonight. We're already an hour into this, right? We're not even through a lot of our slides. There's a lot of changes. There are going to be more of these clinics coming up because there's like major sections of the manual that are coming out, and so this is going to be all published on YouTube where you can come back and see them later. As we go through the season, we'll have more clinics and things where we can kind of point out things. What we typically also do is, as we get into the early season events. We do recaps where we say what kind of things we're seeing at the events that teams should be aware of and know about. And so just know that you know this is going to be a process for all of us to absorb all of these new rules and changes, but it can also be a lot of fun. All right, let's go to the next piece here. Next part is in the robot rules is battery limits. So First Tech Challenge has always been very restrictive on what batteries you can use. They've added some batteries to the set of batteries that are available, and most notably, I think finally the Go Build a Nested battery is included as one of the legal batteries. If you're not familiar with the nested battery, it's pictured here in the middle of the three on the bottom. So the one on the left are what are called the flat batteries. They're available from AndyMark or from Rev. Then you have the square batteries that are typically available from Matrix or Go Build a sells a version, or Tetrix or various other places. But the nested battery is nice and unique in that it will fit inside of a Go Build a channel. And I think it'll even fit inside of a Rev channel. I haven't tested that yet because I've never bought one of these. But that gives another nice storage option or another mounting option for teams that are looking to use the Go Build a battery. So I think that'll be really useful to see in the upcoming season. I'm very glad that they did that. All right, let's see what else is there on this. The other big change that people have talked about for a year or so now is coming up. There's a question about can the slides be later on to use? Yes, I will make the slides available. Is allowable servos. And for people who are volunteers and have been involved in the inspector forums or in the referee forums, then you'll know and you'll have heard of what are being called the servo wars, or the things where we have very enterprising individuals and organizations, companies that have been creating new and amazing servos that would exploit the old servo rule so that you could get really crazy powerful servos that were far beyond what was envisioned a servo was supposed to be. So I was actually on or invited to submit my comments about what the servo rules should be, or to comment on some ideas that First Tech Challenge was having for servo rules. So I'm pleased with what they came out with. I think it works out pretty well. So it used to be that anything that had a 3-pin servo plug on it that would plug into the servo port and work was considered to be an allowable servo. That's no longer the case. Servos are now limited by the amount of mechanical output power they have and by their stall current. And so regular, normal, rotational servos, servos are limited to a 4-amp stall current. So if you purchase a servo that has a stall current greater than 4 amps, then that servo is not considered legal for First Tech Challenge. And you're limited to 8 watts of mechanical output power. And that has to do with how much torque and how much speed the servo is able to produce. And there's a table on the next slide that I'll get to here. If you're using a linear servo, then you're limited to 1 amp of stall current. And for those servos that provide position feedback, that's considered legal. So legal, not illegal, but it's considered to be valid. So looking at the allowable servos, they publish in the competition manual a list of servos that are already declared to be legal, right? If you use one of these servos, and most of the standard FTC supplier servos are listed there. So there's AndyMark servos, there's the Go Build a dual mode servos are available. And these are all examples. This is not intended to be a complete or a prescriptive list that these are the only ones you can use, but they are compiling a list of servos for which it's known that their characteristics are such that they meet the rule. And so you can see there up on the top that the Axon Max servos, which are really pretty powerful and which were subjects for much of this discussion, they are still considered legal. They fall within this, and they're some of the most powerful servos that you can buy, and they remain legal for the upcoming season. There are some linear servos there. They have other power requirements that is there. And then the definition of how you calculate mechanical output power, the formula is given there. And they also have an online tool that you can go to where you put in the manufacturer specifications and it will tell you if it's legal or not legal. And you could take that presumably you could do a print screen of that online tool and take it with you to a competition to be able to demonstrate, hey, my servo is legal. So it will be there. The what this means, though, is that if you're a team and you're using a non-standard servo, that is something that's not obviously one of the servos that's on this list, or it's kind of, looks weird or is questionable, you need to be prepared to document that the servo you have on your robot is legal, or the inspectors may require you to remove whatever servo you have from your robot and replace it with a legal. So teams using non-standard servos, then you need to make sure that you go to an event with the documentation verifying the servo specifications and compliance. And something that my team has done in the past couple of years that works really well is that we have started compiling a notebook that we take with us to events that has all of the non-standard parts that we have on the robot, or parts that an inspector might look at and go, huh, what is that? And along with each non-standard part, we list the rules that say that that part can be used or that show that that part is legal to use. And that helps speed things along really, really quickly. One of the servos that was under much discussion here in the off season is that there's a group called Melonbotics that were creating a quote unquote servo that was actually a motor, but since it had the 3-wire interface, it would be legal under the previous set of First Tech Challenge rules. With the redesigned rules, those servos are not currently legal. They have too much power and they draw too much current in order to be considered legal for a First Tech Challenge. So if you were looking at, or you were thinking of investing a lot into these servos that you were going to use them this season, just know that they're not currently legal. There's a note on the company's website that says they're looking at ways to possibly try and revamp what they have to make them into legal. There's a question in the chat, what are non-standard servos? What I mean by non-standard is servos that are not commonly used in FTC. That's what I mean by non-standard, because when you go to a competition, what happens is you have to go through robot inspection at the beginning of the day or before you compete in any matches. And inspectors are trying to move robots through as quick as they can. And so what you want to do as a team, and what we ask for teams to do, is that if you're using servos, the inspectors can't be familiar with every servo that is available for purchase. And also, we don't want to restrict teams and say, well, you can only use this specific set of servos. So for teams that go kind of beyond the normal servos that you would expect, the airplane hobby grade servos or things like that, then you should be prepared to come to justify or show that those servos are there. There's some other questions that are here. Let's see. There are people quoting the game manual. The competition manual. That's really good. There's a list. There will be a published list of servos that are pre-approved that people will get together. You should put together documentation. There's also going to be a parts suggestion form that will be online, so that if you have a part, not just servos, but any other part that you think is currently illegal, but you think ought to be legal in First Tech Challenge, there's an online form where you can put in the details and kind of submit it, and allow the First Tech Challenge technical folks and the game design folks to take a look at your suggestion and say, yes, we should add this to the legal parts list, or we should make sure that that's included, or no, it's not going to be legal, and maybe even some feedback as to why. So that would be really cool. Question is, if you reprogram the servo so that they draw less current and have low power output, will that make it legal? And I think the answer is no. That might need a clarification, but I believe it's the maximum output a servo can do, not what you might have limited it to do. Similar for amperage.
Yeah, I can input a little bit in on this. So currently inside the game manual, it says stall current is the maximum stall current possible for the device at the specified voltage, regardless of any programmable software limits that may be available within the servo. So if you have a servo that, let's say, it has a stall current of 6 amps at 6 volts, but you can program it down, you still have to follow that it's still going to be a stall current of 6 amps at 6 volts.
And then there's another question in the chat that the axons have a fourth wire position feedback and they require a specific board to function. But can you make your own or do your own wiring? I'll get to that a little bit when we talk a little bit more about electronics in general. But the short answer is you can create a custom wire. You do not have to use a commercial off-the-shelf board in order to make that connection. It would be, to my reading of things, it would be totally legal to take a JST-PH cable, which is the normal cable that plugs into the analog port, cut it and splice the wires together, and that would be legal. There's nothing that says it has to be a commercial off-the-shelf component. There's only a few places in wiring where they say it must be a commercial off-the-shelf component, and those tend to be more advanced cases, but you're not required to use the Axon provided conversion board or to have a off-the-shelf component to do that.
And I want to add on to what Nova said. Thank you, Nova, for being here tonight. He's our regional. They're our regional FTA for North Texas until December, and an intern at Rev. And they used words like stall current and no load RPM. If these words mean nothing to you or your students, this is a great opportunity to teach your students about how motors work, what a no load speed is, what a stall current is, how to figure out the maximum efficiency of a motor, and do all that work. This is a great educational opportunity because these things are very important in mechanical engineering.
I'd like to add on to this. First Tech Challenge comes out with tech tips every week. The week of June 6, 2024, they have an entire thing, and I'll link it in the chat, on calculating motor and servo power and going over what those terms mean and everything like that, and how to calculate it, including like Patrick said earlier, the servo mechanical power calculator is also linked in there too, and some of the common mechanical power values that some teams use. So I will drop a link for that inside the chat right now.
That's wonderful information. And for teams, and the fact that they came out with that as tech tips, kind of like, maybe they were foreshadowing something. But the other thing I'll say for those who are newer teams or teams that really want to progress to another level of performance, just know that I can speak for my team. Looking at these things like stall current and output power and things like that, that's something we do every season for every mechanism. The team members all, over time they have learned and they transfer this knowledge from one generation to the next, so to speak. But understanding those features of the motors you use on your robot are really key to making a fast and powerful robot. And so, as I'll re-emphasize what Lon just said, it's a great teaching moment, and it's also something that can elevate your team's performance in competition if that's something that you're looking to do. All right, let's see here. In the section on allowable motors, for those who have been around in First Tech Challenge for a while, then you know that motors, there's a very, unlike servos, which is basically any servo that meets these criteria you can use. In the case of motors, you are limited to very, very specific motors. And I didn't list them here. That there's a couple of additions from last year, but nothing, significant. It's just another couple of vendors that create motors that are listed in the competition manual. But they're very tightly controlled on what can be a motor. And the motors are the more powerful actuators. They're more powerful than servos and things like that. And so you're really limited to a set of vendors like Rev, Andy Mark, GoBuilda, Tetrix, and Studica now is added, and so on. So there's not a lot of change in the motors, except for this very notable addition, right? And that notable addition is that if you have a sensor, a commercial off-the-shelf sensor, like a LiDAR or a scanning sonar, and it has a motor in it, that motor is legal and it doesn't count against your motor limit, right? So you wouldn't use it as an actuator. But one of the things that many First Tech Challenge teams have wanted to be able to explore adding to their robot are what are called 360-degree LiDAR scanners. And so what this is a laser distance sensor, but it spins in 360 degrees really, really fast. And it can give your robot kind of a map of the things that are around it, the obstacles that are around it, because the laser beam goes out and it bounces back really, really quickly, and the sensor gets a distance. But it can see that distance in a 360 degree focus. But those have not been legal in First Tech Challenge for quite some time. But now it looks as though, because of this addition that's there, that 360 degree LiDAR sensors might actually be legal. My current reading of the rules is that they are. And by Nova happened to check this, for which I'm grateful that they offered this addition, is that the text that's here is actually the same text that's in the first robotics competition manual, where 360 degree LiDARs have been available, I think, for some time. So it's the same wording, and so I think it's there. In fact, it's really interesting because I went and looked at last year's competition manual for FRC, and the table that describes the allowable motors and actuators that are available for FRC robots looks an awful lot like the table that they just introduced in the First Tech Challenge manual. Like it seems to me like there's a pretty obvious borrowing from that particular format, and I think it looked really, really well. So anyway, so that was a very interesting note that I saw in the manual, is that, wow, 360 degree LiDAR might be a thing this year. All right, so for the control, command, and signal system, these are sensors, the robot controllers, the control hub, the expansion hub, the driver station. In general, as far as I could tell, things that were legal in last year and in previous years are still legal now. I didn't see anything that just jumped out at me in the manual to say, oh, wow, that's a major change in terms of, the things that are legal. But what I really did notice is that when it comes to sensors in particular, and other things like decorative LEDs or even functional LEDs, the current competition manual has very little in the way of restrictions on those, about what kind of sensors you can use or how you connect the LEDs. If you've ever tried to do things with LEDs on your robot, either for illumination of something or to be able to decorate your robot and make it look really cool because you have lights on your robot, then in previous seasons, the rules for how you put those on and how you include those were really, really tightened down. And they were confusing at times because it would say, well, you can use an LED that connects here, but not here. And also only if it's controlled by this, but not this thing, and so on. And those rules, all sorts of things, all sorts of things that would be there. There's a question in the chat that I'll get to in a second. So it looks like there's really a lot of openness as far as what you can do for electronic signals, electronic sensors on your robot. And as a team, coming from a team where we use a lot of sensors and we really like to play with a lot of different electronic devices to try and improve the robot performance, that makes me feel really good about it. The one exception that I found, which I expect there will be clear clarifications on, is R702, which makes this comment about no general purpose coprocessors. And I think from reading this rule, it's pretty clear that they're basically saying, no, you can't put a Raspberry Pi on your robot, or you can't put an Arduino on your robot. But for people who are familiar with Raspberry Pis and Arduinos, and especially the way the rest of the rule is listed, it talks about them as being coprocessors. And I don't think of a Raspberry Pi or an Arduino as being a coprocessor. I tend to think of it as being, a single board computer or something like that, or a microcontroller board or something like that. I don't tend to think of them as being coprocessors. To me, the coprocessor would be the actual microcontroller unit, the chip that is inside. And the challenge I have with this particular rule as it's written now is that there are actually a lot of sensors that have what would be called general purpose processors on them, in them. And one of the so like if I go and I buy a sensor that's measuring distance, right? That distance sensor will probably have some sort of a transducer or something that is actually able to send a signal out, have that signal bounce off of something and bring it back. But before that signal gets to my robot, it might get processed by some sort of processor that's on that device. And this rule could be read to say that's not allowed. I don't think that is the intent. I hope that's not the intent. But when I'm an inspector or a referee and I'm reading the rules, I have to read the text of the rules as the rules exist, right? I can't say what I think they ought to do. And so I think it is possible for an inspector or a referee to read this rule and say, oh, this sensor has a general purpose coprocessor inside of it, so it's not legal. And so something that I think could be part of that is the SparkFun odometry sensor. We're going to do a seminar on the SparkFun odometry sensor. If you're not familiar with it, SparkFun at the beginning of June introduced what's called an optical odometry sensor. My team used it for the Maryland Tech Invitational. It seems to work really, really well. We like it, right? There's not anything in the manual that specifically references the SparkFun odometry sensor as being legal or not legal, and so you're left to look at the rules and say, well, would it be legal? But I know, because I can look at the actual board, the parts are exposed, that there is a general purpose processor on that SparkFun sensor, and this rule would seem that it could actually prohibit that. Again, I don't think that's the intent, but I'm sure there's going to be some clarification about that. So to answer the question in the chat, STK 9.2 mentions SparkFun, but the manual doesn't. My thoughts are, I think the SparkFun is going to be legal. This rule, it seems to be at odds with that. I fully expect there to be clarification in the next release of the competition manual. Other interesting new and legal products that have been mentioned or referenced in the manual. One of them is what's called the Studica Servo Power Block. If you have done much with powerful servos, then you know that Rev Robotics has sold a product called the Servo Power Module that is a power injector that allows you to get more power and speed out of your servos when you hook them up to your robot. My team has had challenges with the Rev Servo Power Module in the past few years where we don't feel it has been performed well. So I'm glad to see there's a new option available. I've already ordered one of these to get it in so that we can evaluate it and see how well it works relative to the Rev Servo Power Module. So we're gonna look at it and evaluate it and so forth. It's nice that there's another option available because prior to now, your choices were either use the Rev Servo Power Module or live with whatever power limits could come from the expansion hub or the control hub. Similarly, another product, this was actually created a couple of seasons ago. It's called the OctoQuad, and it was not legal, but the idea of the OctoQuad, if you have done odometry, and for those who are new, odometry is a very common technique, especially used during autonomous, where your robot can keep track of its position on the field. And so we just talked about the SparkFun sensor, but there are other ways of doing it as well, including what are called passive encoder wheels. One of the challenges to using passive encoder wheels for odometry is that they eat up the encoder ports that you would really like to use for your motors. You end up using them for your passive odometry wheels, and then you're stuck. But the OctoQuad is designed to get around that by providing you additional ports whereby you can plug encoders into them and it will keep track of the speed, the velocity, and the things of the wheels that they're attached to. So it's a really, really useful product. It was developed a couple of years ago, but because internally it contains a Raspberry Pi, and you can kind of see that in the pictures, it's got a Raspberry Pi Zero in there. It was not legal for use in First Tech Challenge, but the manual says explicitly it's a legal part for this season. So that will be an interesting addition for people who want to do the passive wheel odometry. So that's a very interesting product that's come out. And also, if you come from the FRC world, then you undoubtedly have heard of the Limelight. And this is a camera-based localization system where you're able to use a camera for your robot to know where it is on the field. There is apparently a First Tech Challenge version of this camera that is being developed by the company behind Limelight, and that will be available and will be allowed for use this season. So the product that's coming out is called the Limelight 3A. There aren't any specs about it that I could find online. And the picture that is here is the one that's used for FRC, just because I wanted to have a picture. But that's an exciting new development as well, that there may be some dedicated vision systems that you can add to your robot for better navigation, in addition to the other possibilities that are there. And of course, for people who have been in the first robotics competition environment, you know that when the Limelight comes, it just is going to bring years of development expertise behind it into the First Tech Challenge arena, which will be really, really nice. There's a question about, will there be documentation on how to use the Limelight 3A? I have no idea. It won't come from First Tech Challenge. It'll almost certainly come from the vendor, I think. So I think that'll be a very interesting thing. And when it does come out, I'm sure either I will do it as a clinic, or we'll get some enterprising team to try it out and do a online clinic to say, this is our experience with the Limelight, and here's where it would help you, where it might not help you. You know, what some of the advantages and disadvantages are. That's really really a useful thing. Another one that came up, just because as a competition volunteer, as a contest volunteer in various key roles, I've seen teams that arrive to the fields and they have an operator console. So the operator console, it's usually a structure that you use to hold your driver station and your game pads and so forth. And some of them can be kind of small, and, you know, and easy to use. But sometimes teams will arrive with this gigantic tray or this gigantic tripod on which they're putting all of these controllers and stuff to be able to have it as an all-in-one system that is there. There are now new limits on the operator consoles. So it says they can't be more than 3 feet wide, a foot deep, and 2 feet tall. So that's a limitation on the operator console. Now that does not, like, it's not that, you know, the drivers have to be within certain amounts, right? The game pads with the cords they have, you know, that are held by the drivers, those can exceed that range. But if you have a console, some sort of thing that combines all of the driver station stuff together, then you're now bound by these limits. Similarly, if you go to the driver station and you have a backup US or a supplemental USB battery for the driver station, which, by the way, is a recommended practice that I'm going to be reinforcing throughout the season. I've had too many experiences with either my team or other teams having driver stations where the power disconnects right before a match is about to start, or even worse, when a match is underway. That I think just every team should plan for some sort of backup battery system for their driver station, and we'll have some seminars and some guidelines on how to on ways that you can do that without breaking the bank. But there are now limits on those USB batteries, so you are limited in terms of the amount of capacity that those batteries have and how they hook up. I know that my team has sometimes shown up to a match with this honking big, you know, battery that's designed to start a car as their backup power. Now there's limitations on that, so just be aware of that. There you know, and there are things that are you know, specific about the batteries and how they are connected and things like that. So that's a new change, I think a welcome change, but just another change that shows up in the manual. Event rules, and I want to make sure. Let me pop up here. So on. All right. So event rules, section 5, we jumped through robot rules. Before I do event rules, just really quickly, does anybody have any comments or anything else that they either saw in the event rules that they have a question about, if they've already read the manual, or they would like clarification on from what we've just described? Let me just make a pause before I jump to event rules. And we're going to run a little over time. If you have to leave or weren't planning to stay for the full hour and a half or can't stay longer, then that's fine. We'll do more of these again. There's a question in the chat.
I wanted to add something really quick. I want to point out, like, this is a brand new manual. So if you're a little confused by what's going on, or you're like, but wait, what about the one thing we did a few years back? There will be updates, there will be questions asked. So don't feel like you're not getting all of the answers, because we don't have all of the answers yet. So just be prepared to have some answers I don't actually know yet,
Yeah.
especially for the robot rules.
Yeah. Well, actually, for all the rules, I expect that to be true for all the different rules. That there are going to be things that we know have happened in the past, and I mean, I can only imagine how much work has been put in by the First Tech Challenge people who are redesigning these manuals, because I know how hard it is, but there's clearly a lot of thought that's gone into refactoring these rules and figuring out where things can go from what existed before to what it is now. And in that process, sometimes things just get overlooked, or special situations like what if a team goes with a non-rectangular sign? I mean, those kind of things, you can't anticipate everything, and that's why we have updates.
And also, there's hundreds of thousands of people looking at these manuals, and there's a very close-knit group working on the manuals. So obviously, there's going to be a lot of, oh, but this, and this, and they're like, thank you. So any feedback and commentary is, as long as it is constructive and positive, is extremely welcome.
Right. There's a question in the chat. Are gamepad button additions allowed? I know someone said it was illegal, but confused as to why. Depends on the type of addition. So let me go ahead.
Take that one. So, sure. Our rule R904, only limited gamepads are supported. So you can only have 2 electrically unmodified gamepads in a form with a combination of the lists connected to the driver station at any time. Electrically unmodified means that if you're trying to plug something into the gamepad or anything like that, so like if you're trying to plug in let's say it's an add-on that adds 2 more buttons, you cannot do that because you're electrically modifying the gamepad to add those buttons to it. You have to have no more than 2 gamepads that are not modified like that. You can do physical modifications to it as how it is written at the moment. Sorry, hold on. Enhancements to the gamepad that do not modify electronics are legal.
Correct.
Yes. But since you're modifying the overall the electronic structure of it, how the rule is written right now, anything that adds more buttons because you're tapping into the electronic circuit is not legal.
Yep, and I've pulled up, just for people to see, I've pulled up the Rule 904, R904 that Nova just mentioned. So the key thing, one of the things that came across earlier in one of the questions we got on through another channel was, can I take this thing and plug it into my gamepad and that gives me more buttons? And the answer is no, that probably violates R904, because by plugging it into the gamepad, you're modifying the electronics. And so it's the electronically unmodified part that makes that not legal. And as Nova just pointed out, however, mechanical additions to the buttons are allowed as long as you aren't modifying the gamepad itself. So if you wanted to make a button bigger by 3D printing something that goes over that button to make it bigger or easier to press from a different way, mechanical additions to the gamepads are allowed. Let's see, there's a question that just came in the chat also about being new to this and how do you make sure you get all the announcements. So let me see if I can jump ahead to that. Do I have it? Yes, I do. Okay, let me see if I can jump ahead to that slide and pull it up. And you'll see this come about many different places, but there are many different sources by which you can get information. And actually, I probably should just pull up the disclaimer while I'm at it for this. So let me go to the previous slide, which is our disclaimer, right? So first of all the things that we're saying here that we're telling you, they're unofficial, right? This is just, us getting together to try and help interpret the rules and things like that. But with maybe the exception of Erica, because she's the chief referee, and maybe the exception of Lon, because he's the PDP, for the most part, whatever we tell you on these calls, the first thing we'll do is disclaim them and say, we're not the official source of answers. And so there are other places that you can go to get the official answers and so forth. So you will get emails from First Tech Challenge. They have things called team blasts, and they they point to where you can get answers, and they tell you about things coming up. There are emails that will come from First in Texas. There are emails that will come from Lon Cherry Holmes as the coordinator from North Texas. But there is also a Google group that we have established. It's existed for like 10 years now, I think. It's the North Texas FTC Google group. And there's a link here where you can sign up for it. We try to repeat this this URL at all the different meetings and remind people. It is an open group where coaches, mentors, team members, and so forth can communicate, and a lot of activities that take place in the North Texas area or key events that may happen that affect North Texas teams, they get posted to the Google group. Most of the communications that are on the Google group are not official communications from the official sources I just mentioned. But if you want to know about these seminars and things that are happening, then definitely register for the Google group. It's not a high traffic mailing list. So it's, you're not going to get suddenly flooded by lots and lots of messages for the most part. It tends to get at most 2 or 3 messages per week when it's busy, and often it goes idle. So just I'll point to the Google group since it just came up real quick, that's a easy way that you can be in the know of things that are happening. While I'm mentioning that to know about some other events, when you go to the Google group, definitely look back at some of the emails from the past couple of weeks. There are a couple of teams that are offering workshops in August, where you can go and sign up for the workshop, where there are teams and other experts presenting information about First Tech Challenge. So look on the Google group for those. I don't have announcement pages for those workshops right now to be able to share with you, plus we're running low on time. But the Google group is the easy place to find out about some of those other workshops and events that are coming up in the next month or two that teams will offer to try and improve the event experience for everybody in North Texas. As I said, North Texas is it's had a tradition of a lot of teams working together to improve the event experience, and we end up with some very high performing teams as a result. All right, let me go back to where I was here. Event rules. All right. So on event rules, Section 5 is the event rules, and I'm going to give a public shout out through this little this little YouTube and Zoom channel here, that First Tech Challenge, you guys did an amazing job with the event rules. I encourage everyone to go and read it. I'm speaking both as a coach, but also as somebody who has done a lot of events as either an event director or a volunteer or something like that. The event rules section, it just feels like somebody went through and said, these are all of the really important things, and let's make it organized and so on. So I really have to give a compliment and shout out about the event rules. I'm not going to go through all the event rules because people can read it, but I do have a few that I wanted to point out. So they've been significantly reworked and improved. Lots of common event issues. They're succinct and they're comprehensive. That's what I really like, is that there's a place where I can feel like I can go and I just know that these rules are there. So here are some of the event rules. Number 1, or the first one I'll bring up. Many teams, including my team, they have robot carts, and it's a wheeled device or something that they use to transport their robot from place to place at a competition. They're really useful. Especially as your robot starts getting upwards of 30 pounds or more, it gets really tiring and somewhat, possibly, I don't want to say dangerous, but risky to be carrying your robot from place to place. So it's a good idea to have carts. But they have now given guidelines and rules about the restrictions on robot carts, and they're listed here. The one at the bottom, I know it's going to disappoint some of the teams in the area that really like to have self-propelled or motor-driven carts to move their robots from place to place. That's no longer allowed because of E605. So sorry, it'll all have to be human pushed now or driven, but not using a motor of some sort. It wouldn't surprise me if a team comes up with like a gerbil propelled cart or something like that. I don't think that counts as a motor. Anyway.
And I love E602 about the carts must fit through a 30-inch door, because we in the past, we had to take out the metal bar in some of the doors, like at our area championship. Creates a tripping hazard. So once again, this has got safety in mind. That cart needs to be able to go through a normal door. It's amazing.
Yeah, so I mean, lots of good things. That you can't just put your cart wherever you want. You have to leave it in the pit, or it has to be somewhere that's kind of a designated for carts. You don't just take them with you and set them next to the field and things like that. So it's nice that again they really thought this through and said we need a section on robot carts, which I agree with. Um, uh, this one is quite interesting to me. And Erica, did you want to take this one, or I think
I'm
this was on your
I'm
list.
I'm happy to.
Okay.
So this one is super important for me as a head referee who also does the stand-in for lead robot inspector. Um, you have to be inspected and pass the inspection in order to use the practice field that's provided at events. Um, there's a slight exception unless there's like scheduled inspection times, but for the most part, especially here in North Texas, it's a like when you're ready to be inspected, please be inspected. But now you have to pass that inspection in order to use the practice field. This has safety of field and equipment in mind, which I'm a really big advocate for because I don't like replacing tiles or replacing field elements or walls. But it also helps regulate safety of the students that are on those fields. I know I've many a time walked by the practice field and students are sitting right next to the field with robots that I have not seen in inspection before, and so I don't know if they're safe. But this is super important for me as somebody who has safety in mind. It's very straightforward. Be inspected, use the practice field. And somebody just asked, how will this be enforced at events? We're probably going to workshop it a little bit on how are we going to enforce this because we want to make sure that all participants, including the field, I would say is a participant in this event, is safe and protected. And so we'll workshop it. We'll see what works best for each league, and especially what is within our capability per league. So it's kind of a non-answer for that.
Yeah, I'll add to that just very quickly. I mean, one reason I really like this rule is because we'll go to events and we have some teams that really push the envelope about getting their robotics inspected. Like they'll wait until some later piece of time, and I think this adds another incentive for why you want to get your robot inspected early, if there's a way to do that. And in terms of how it will be enforced at events, at most of the events in North Texas that we do, there's a display showing which teams have been inspected and not inspected. And so it becomes really easy for a competition official, an inspector, head referee, event director, or something like that, to kind of look up at that display and then go and look at the practice field. And if there are robots that are on the practice field that haven't been inspected, then you politely go over to them and say, hey, you really should get your robot inspected. And not be on the practice field. The practice field is really reserved for that. So I don't know. I wouldn't say that there's going to be a super strict enforcement. Like I don't think there's going to be a practice field monitor that is watching the thing to make sure all the robots are inspected and so forth. But I mean, that's a possibility. As Erica just said, we might workshop it. But especially if the event officials are busy and they're looking at the clock and they're kind of concerned about, are we going to have inspections done in time? This becomes a way for them to kind of push teams towards, go ahead and get your robot inspected and you can come back to the practice field, rather than, teams just taking over the practice field. So that would be my comment.
Because I know there are teams where it's like, but we're not working. We can't be inspected until we're working.
In which case you need to not be on the field.
Correct. So it is a helpful rule for all parties.
All right. Let's see here. Pits, and I think you said you would take pits as well, Erica.
Yes. So this year they've added some really nice clarifications to our pits. These are your working areas. This is where you do most of your work. This is where you spend most of your time at competition. Well, other than fields and practice fields. But something really exciting that I really enjoy is that they are allowing some small benchtop machinery. Some of the stuff could include 3D printers, small bandsaws, drill presses, desktop CNC mills, and sanders. But the key point is small machinery, and they identify, their guideline is if one person is able to easily lift it. So if you are lugging in a massive CNC machine, that's not a one person easily lift. So they're allowing some really interesting stuff happening to be allowed to happen in the pits. Pits are unavailable if they're closed, so teams may not be in their pits outside of designated pit hours. This typically doesn't apply to most areas in North Texas, but in instances like our area or state event, that we have a hard cutoff time because we're in a venue that is not ours. So if pits close at 7, they close at 7. And this is pretty standard, but now it's a written rule for us, which is nice. The E502 is something that is really interesting and extremely important that I was reading through. So teams may neither allow their materials to expand beyond their team pit, including running power or internet lines from their team pit to any other area. They cannot swap team pits with other teams, nor move themselves to empty team pits. So a reason why, for me, this is super important is because if I have to come find you, I do not magically know where you are. Typically, we have pit maps, and this tells me where you, as the students and as a team, are. And so you shouldn't be playing swapperonies with anybody, but this also includes you shouldn't be extending any of your stuff. Just the outlet is like just 5 foot from us. You're also you could be invading on other spaces, and you could be leading into maybe some tripping hazards, especially if it crosses a walkway. And then talking about walkways, keep it clear, keep it clean. I should see no sparks. Lauren is a head referee for our E-League here in North Texas, and she always says in drivers' meetings, I am not from here. I don't want to know where the nearest emergency room is. This includes that. If I see fire or sparks, I'm going to panic, and I don't want to know where the nearest emergency room is. So please don't be the first ones to violate the rule. And then nothing too big. So floor standing power tools are prohibited. Remember, it has to be easily carryable by one person. But explicitly, floor standing tools are not allowed. So full-size drill presses, bandsaws, and table saws. If you have a table saw at the competition, I'm a little bit more concerned on why, rather than what are you doing with it. So these are just safety stuff that are being explicitly stated in our rules, which I'm really happy about. Perfect. So they've also added in some not clauses, it's not a legal document, some rules about ceremonies. We have both opening and closing ceremonies, and these are a really big part of the culture of FIRST. I remember as a student that the coolest part of my day was the opening ceremonies because that's the official start of our day. That's when I got to meet volunteers. I got to meet who's running the event. So if something emergency did happen, I did know who to go to. But during these ceremonies, they're asking that pits are quiet during them. So no power tools, no loud hand tools, shouting or yelling or using loud voices unless as a demonstration of approval during ceremonial events. This is just a sign of respect for those individuals who are putting in time to make sure this event runs smoothly and for other participants in the audience as well. And so the next rule, the E702, is really interesting to me and for our larger teams that are capping at those 15 student numbers. During ceremonies, there's a pit limit on how many people can be in that pit, and that limit is 5. No more than 5 team members may be in the pit during ceremonies outside of playoff matches. And so this is just an added incentive just to come to the ceremonies. I know if you are at any of my events that I do a driver's meeting for, I bring candy for any person who answers questions correctly or answers, period. And so it's a little incentive to come see us as volunteers because we want to know you as much as you may or may not want to know us. So, but be advised for some of this stuff.
Okay, cool. There's a couple of questions that came up in the chat.
Yeah.
And I just answered them in the chat. But one of them was, if you can't run extension cords out of your pit, does that mean the venue will provide power to each pit? And that is really up to the venue. That's a really hard ask in a lot of events.
Yeah.
Then the follow up to that was, if they don't provide power to the pit, would some teams get an advantage just by their location? And the real answer is that a venue that doesn't provide power to the pit is obligated to provide a charging station that all teams can use. And yes, you could say, well, some teams end up being closer to that charging station than other teams, but that's not considered to be a significant advantage or disadvantage in general, right? So, just the proximity to wherever the charging station, that's just, luck of the draw sort of thing. So,
and
go
I'd
ahead.
also point out that some venues might not be large enough. Like, for example, they discussed 10 by 10 pit spaces. Some venues might not be able to accommodate that 10 by 10. I think the exact wording is 10 by 10s, or typically pits are 10 by 10. But I know here in North Texas, we don't have venues that are that large. And so it kind of the luck of the draw. If we have the space, if we don't, if we're near outlets, we're near them. If not, work with the venue or the staff at the venue to make sure that you do have all of the resources that you can get and need.
Patrick, was there an update about portable power to the pits? Like, I know you can buy a unit.
Oh, yeah. There's not an update about it, but you're totally welcome to bring your own portable power bank.
And do these portable power banks cause any interference with robot performance?
Not in general. I mean, there might be some that have Wi-Fi capabilities, and you'd need to make sure they're turned off. But otherwise, no, I wouldn't expect that to be the case. That's a really good point. But yeah,
that was our recommendation, even at our area championship, that teams buy a certain, a power station for their own pit. I even provided a link in the communication. So
yeah. It's the follow-up question that occurred in the chat just for other one is, what about power for some of these, tools that you're allowed to have in your pit? Would a team that is closer to a power outlet have an advantage for that? My answer is, if you don't have power in your pit, whether it's event supplied or you bring it yourself by some sort of a portable battery or whatever, then you're not going to be using power tools in your pit if they require AC power or something like that, because you can't run an extension cord somewhere. And unless the venue host designates a space for power tools, you can't just arbitrarily plug your power tool into a charging station. I think that would be the limitation there. All right, looking ahead. So we're almost near the end. Thank you all for those of you who have stuck around for all of this. I hope it's being helpful. So looking ahead. So let's talk about the sections that aren't in the that are blank currently in the competition manual. So coming in September, some of the sections that are blank are section 3, which is about eligibility and inspection. And we'll have the inspection rules, what you have to do in order to pass inspection and be eligible for competition. The advancement rules, I don't know. I have not heard anything that indicates there are significant changes to the advancement rules, but who knows? And judged awards. So possibly some refactoring or rethinking of judged awards. We'll just have to wait and see what First Tech Challenge comes out with for those. And definitely just know when they come out with the information in these sections, we'll hold another seminar to give our interpretation of what we think it means for things. But those are sections I'm very eager to see that aren't game specific. The next set of ones are the game-specific sections, which are sections 8 through 11. Those we know will come out on kickoff day, and those are the ones that we are eagerly awaiting for. If you sign up to the Google group, or you'll start getting announcements from the official sources about the kickoff events that are near you, if you want to attend a kickoff event, or you can attend online to learn about the game details and so forth. I will just comment that these sections, again, look very FRC-like. In FRC, there is a section called the arena, which describes the field and how it's constructed and stuff. There's another section that is the overall details for the game, and there's finally a section with the game rules. And so I think that that's that again, it's a nice parallel to what we've seen in FRC, and it's a good organization process, I think. And then finally, I found this interesting, just again, looking ahead. that they've already designated separate sections for the different types of events that we have. In the past, it was, there would be rules that would be like, all events have this, but if you're at a tournament, it's these rules that apply. And if you're at a league tournament, it's these rules that apply, and so forth. Those appear like they're going to be broken out into separate sections. I highly approve. Way to go, First Tech Challenge. I also very much like that it appears they are creating a separate section for the first championship, because this has certainly been the case with FRC. It's been the de facto case for FTC, even if it's not documented that way. Just a recognition that the rules and the things that happen at first championship are not always the same as what happens at your previous events in a season. The first championship is kind of its own beast, and it may have its own rules. And there's not anything that is intended to my mind. I've always said that that there's not an intention that the way things happen at first championship is the way that they should happen at the earliest league meet or at some of the earlier events in the season. And so it may or may not be. We'll see what comes out. But the fact that first championship is being called as out and explicitly listed as its own event type, I really like to see that's there. So that's kind of looking ahead to the game specific things that are there. And so that's kind of our overall review. The next thing I thought I would do, and then we'll open it up for more questions, and I'll stay on as long as people want to talk. That's just the way I tend to be, is just kind of a review from Erica and I and any of the other internal folks. How do you feel about the manual updates? So Erica, I'm going to let you talk about your likes and dislikes from what you've seen so far.
Absolutely. So I'm a creature of habit, and I'm not a huge fan of change, but I do understand the purpose behind it. It's taken me many years to come to that conclusion that change is okay. But some of the things that I really enjoy about this manual are the evergreen rules. If you ever hear me talk about rules, this is a Band-Aid rule from last year, where it's a rule that specifically covers one very particular instance. We now have these evergreen rules where these are our consistent ones that stay the same throughout. And we kind of had that last year, but with the big revamp, we kind of get rid of the Band-Aid rules. So the evergreen rules are nice to have now, which I'm really excited about. I love that the numbers have very clear expectations, where last year where there was a lot of like free range with them. I'm not saying I didn't like the creativity of the numbers, but it does get a little muddied where some of the teams kind of play the rule rather than following the rule,
and just
which
to
I don't
clarify,
discourage.
you mean the team numbers on the robots, right?
Yes,
the ones that
team numbers on the robots,
right?
Thank you. And one of the other really big things that I really like is that the Q&As don't overrule the the competition manual. Again, I mentioned it earlier. I literally combed through 300 plus Q&As just to make sure I didn't miss anything. I had a running document of all of the questions that really impacted the game in any specific way, but that I don't have to do that anymore. And then something else that's really exciting that I know that they pulled from FRC that I'm not mad about is links within the documents. And so what this is that there are some references inside some rules that you can literally click on the rule, and it shows as a link with an underline, and it'll take you to that rule. This is extremely nice for individuals like myself who have the rules right there all the time, and so this just helps with like user interface. And so dislikes is a really strong word for me. Oh, somebody said somebody can hear my cat yelling in the background. No, I apologize. She's having a hard time right now, but she is okay. But dislike is strong, but team flags I know is from FRC. And so I don't dislike the idea of team flags. Patrick, do you want to scroll to the next slide? Because I know it has the rule on it. But these are full-size flags that are now allowed. I dislike it for safety purposes. If you've seen an FRC match, you know that flags are waved on field and they are full-size flags with their poles. I'm not discouraging it. I'm not super mad at it, but I don't like it for safety reasons because I'm nitpicky. Something I do kind of dislike is the number plate sizes. Um, because it's the square. Earlier we were talking about it, and Patrick posted all of these different sizes, and I'm like, oh no, what if we cut down on the creativity of it? Hopefully not. Hopefully we can have some fun shapes still meeting the requirements. But something that I do have a hard time handling is that this is all one manual now. We don't have a game manual 1 and 2. It's the competition manual. And I noted it's already at 75 pages. And so I mentioned that I have those rules with me at all times. I'm going to be doing a lot of this. Even though the manual has in itself a kind of document outline that I can click to within the PDF, it's still going to be a little tedious for me. But that is not something that I'm upset with outside of it's going to be tedious. I appreciate all of the work that the game design committee, especially those writing these documents, have put into it. It's just a personal thing. And then I mentioned I'm a creature of habit. That's a lot of change from the game manuals of the past. I've been in robotics, especially FTC, for 11 years now. And so, wow, Pandora. I'm so sorry, everyone. But it's a lot of change, and so you're gonna be surviving with it. Okay, I'm gonna cut it off short because she is yelling. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I agree. I did likes and dislikes because it was obvious as headers, but dislikes is too strong a word. It's things that were kind of like, yeah, mez, something like that. Anyway, mine, I've got a long list too, and I'll go through it pretty quickly. So I really like the team update format. I've been wanting that for years, especially after I got familiar with it in FRC. I like the idea of the robot signs. I think that it's nice to have some much better standards, and I particularly like that the robot signs now include the alliance color. In the past, we've done robot flags and a bunch of other things. Having a consistent way or somewhat more consistent way of identifying your team alliance and your team number on your robot seems good. I'm really happy that they've, again, reduced the size of the numbers that you use. When I started with First Tech Challenge, numbers had to be 3 inches tall, which is huge. Then a few years ago they switched it down to be 2.5, which is much better. Now the numerals only have to be 2 inches tall. That is so much nicer. I can live with 2-inch tall numerals. And I know part of the reason they did that is because now we have more 5-digit team numbers where the first digit's not a 1 or missing altogether, a shorter number. And so once you start getting into those 5-digit numbers and the first digit is a 2, that's adding a fair bit of extra space. So going to 2-inch numerals is a definite improvement. Despite my team having taken advantage of the lack of horizontal extension limits, I'm happy with that rule. I think it will make for better games. I'm very happy with the greater freedom and clarity that it appears we're going to get for electronics, with just a few ambiguities. I'm happy they are allowing the go build and narrow batteries. Those have been available for years, but not allowed, and it has caused confusion for teams and so forth. And so I'm glad they found it within themselves to go and approve that battery as well. Interesting, in R307-H, ratcheting devices are now legal. They were legal at one point, then they were made not legal, and now they are legal. And if you're wondering what a ratcheting device is, the easy way is a ratchet wrench. If you've ever used a ratchet wrench, which turns in one direction but doesn't in another, there are teams in the past who would use a ratcheting wrench as part of their robot. So that if you had to do an activity like climbing or something where you wanted to be able to go in one direction but not have it backdrive the other way, then you could literally use a ratcheting wrench as a one-way ratchet on your device. Those are now legal again if you want to use them. I'm happy there's another servo power module in the works that will hopefully perform well and that could be used on robots. And I didn't get to point it out, but throughout the the competition manual in the robot rules, there is a part suggestion form. Oh, I did mention it, but there's a part suggestion form where there's a formal mechanism whereby teams can at least make their requests known and make it known to First Tech Challenge through something other than the Q&A forum to kind of make the case about why something should be included as a valid part in First Tech Challenge. I really liked Section 5, the way it's been done. I like the fact that it's closer to the FRC manual. There are many times when I will be talking with FRC counterparts, whether it's coaches or fellow volunteers or even other teams, and you try and describe the way things are in FTC, and it just makes no sense to them because there have been so many differences between the two programs. I am not at all advocating and will never advocate that FTC should become FRC or FRC Lite. I think the differences we have are really important, but being able to get some similarities in the places that are actually similar, I think is a plus. I didn't pull up pages for it, but these are all alphabet or capitalized, these terms. In the robot rules, they made some really, really good distinctions among these different things about what is a component, what is a mechanism, what is something that is commercial off the shelf, what is a vendor, what is a fabricated item. That level of detail just made so many of the rules read clearer to me as a future inspector, as a referee, as a coach. It was like, wow, there's a lot of clarity. Somebody really put some thought into how we could better word some of the rules from previous seasons to make it clear how these different things interact and what's allowed and what's not. I think I like that the manual seems to be looking ahead to the new control system that will be coming out in a couple of years and already thinking about how that new control system might impact the rules and to be able to build in the slots or the ability to evolve to that. And I really like the glossary terms. I think there will be more of them at some point, but if you go and look at the glossary definitions at this point look really clear. In fact, I would say clearer than First Robotics Competition. Me and some of the other key volunteers that have worked in First Robotics Competition have noticed that the glossary terms are sometimes kind of ambiguous. There's a question in the chat about, will the new control system replace the control and expansion hub? Yes, it is intended to replace the control and expansion hub. And there's a blog post about it that we'll send a note about it, but it was announced earlier in the year about there's a process that's currently underway to decide what the next evolution of control system will be for First Tech Challenge. And also an exciting part of that is that it will be the same control system that is used for the First Robotics Competition. So both FTC and FRC will share the same control system. That doesn't mean they'll be identical in all of the respects, but at least the hardware will be the same, and teams will be able to share knowledge and resources across the two programs, which I think will be a big plus. My dislikes or my like not so much. The robot signs, I love the robot signs. I think the 6.5 inch minimum is just a little too large for me. From experience in having worked with teams that have created robots for years and some high performing robots at that, man, if somebody said you've got to have a 6.5 inch by 2.5 inch flat area where you can put your team number, that would seriously impact the design of some of the robots that we've done. It's not just a trivial thing to slap a sign on the side that has these specific dimensions. And so that's something that I wish was a little bit smaller. Maybe half an inch smaller would actually make a huge difference. But I do understand that they probably wanted to make it much more of a standard, so that because teams with smaller numbers in terms of fewer digits have had an advantage in terms of the robot numbers going on their robot because it didn't have to take up so much space. So standardizing that space, I think, makes sense. 6.5 inches just feels a little too big to me. I was shocked by how few rules or restrictions there seem to be on sensors, and I'm worried that might be a little ambiguous. I expect clarification on it, but initially it makes me a little concerned about what might be there. So those are mine, and we'll open it up for questions. But I also just wanted to check in with Lon. Lon, did you have any reactions from what you've seen so far? Or Nova?
No, I did have some motivational things I wanted to say to the group here. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I know it was a 2-hour workshop. And the reason why we wanted to do this, I asked them to do this, is because in the past, when they used to release Game Manual Part 1 during the summer, no one would read it except for Patrick, me, and Emily. And so we wanted to get some excitement around this new game manual. And, tonight you heard about new technologies that you could be using on your robot and exploring this year that you might not even have known about if you didn't open up the game manual as it has been released today. So I really I want to give thanks to Patrick, Erica, and Nova for their numerous contributions tonight. They have been working on this for about 2 or 3 days in a row. I assume Patrick has been working on this nonstop. Erica is doing her journal that is just a masterpiece. Maybe she should release her previous journals and we can sell them or something, make a fundraiser. For your students, a lot of the stuff in these rules, it kind of parallels what happens in the legal world, in our country. The laws get released and there could be lawsuits about commas. There could be lawsuits about the meaning of one word in a law. Laws get changed, laws get modified. There's case studies, there's case law, and but yet there's only one law and it has to be changed. So, we obviously know about the benefits for STEM in our First Tech Challenge program. But if you have any students considering pursuing law or want to become a judge one day or be a lawyer, this is a program for them as well. Every team should designate 1 or 2 students who are just rule experts, who are checking that game forum every week, updating the team about the rules. The ones who go talk to the head referee in the box, and they always have the game manual or the competition manual on hand. This is an opportunity to get your students excited about legal law, and the whole reason that we have all of these rules is, in order for something to be a game, it has to have rules. And if something doesn't have rules, it's not a game. And if something's not a game, it's not fun. So that's why we have these rules in place. Games require rules. Rules make what games are. Games are fun. Fun is part of our core values here at First. So very important meeting, and hopefully I hope that all of y'all are excited about this upcoming Into the Deep season. So yeah, and thanks to First for creating these changes. A great refresher for our region. So
cool. And then Nova, you had some comments. Did you have any other reactions you wanted to add to this?
I don't have a lot necessarily. I'm rather excited for the season, having a game manual or having a competition manual that is very reflective of the First Robotics competition game competition manual is very nice, especially as a person who is a First alumni but only did the FRC aspect of First. So being able to see now parallels between them allows me to be able to say, oh, hey, this section specifically on wiring is going to be the same, could potentially be the same in FTC and FRC, which allows for teams, especially for some teams that do FRC and FTC in parallel, there's not I now have to study three different manuals at a time. Now it's 2, and there's a lot of parallelism between them. So having that parallelism is very nice, especially with the upcoming season. And it's very nice because it allows alumni who potentially only did FRC like I did to come into the FTC space and have easier access into learning a lot about FTC2, and same with FRC. That's my main reaction. I'm just really excited to see how all of it pans out. I'm very excited to see how the numbering system works out and how teams adapt to it. It'll especially be nice as a inspector and FTA to be able to see team numbers very clearly and from at least 12 feet, as that is something that has been a struggle in the past for some FTAs, is not being able to identify which robot is which because they only see a tiny small square or a tiny red circle indicating the alliance. So being able to have that being able to have those larger indicators definitely helps from a FTA perspective, but also as a ref perspective too.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you. All right. So I'm gonna take this as being kind of the end spot for what we were planning to present. But as I said, I'll stick around for a while. If anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute and we can continue in the chat. But regardless, for those people who are on the way out, wow, we really appreciate that you joined us. I hope that it was helpful. I hope it was enjoyable. I know it's been fun and exciting for myself, Erica, Lon, and Nova to just be able to talk about these changes and put them together. Oops, I have a message from Lauren. So Lauren, please go ahead and jump in.
Thanks. I am Lauren. I'm our area volunteer coordinator, and this is my obligatory hi, please volunteer for our events if you can. What I'd like to point out is it even says in our new competition manual, it says spirit of volunteering. It kind of reinforces this. But what it also says is it kind of helps explain like our process of it. So when you volunteer, it's not guaranteed. And it actually says that in our new competition manual. It says, please consider volunteering at local events near you, but know that not all applicants can be placed in all roles at any given event. This especially is like when we get later in the season and we have less events and we have way more excited volunteers that are all putting one role, we can fill up roles very quickly. And we can't have 50 refs on the field at that would be a lot of refs at one event. So please know that when you apply, we really, really appreciate it. And we genuinely need volunteers all the time, but there may be events that we can't place you. And so just please consider volunteering, and thank you for considering it.
Cool. Excellent. Yes, I totally agree. It is, and again, it is nice that it's all in one place and that First Tech Challenge is really thinking about the issues that confront teams, coaches, volunteers, and event organizers. It's really good. All right. So again, it's open. Feel free to put things in the chat. But again, I really appreciate people coming out. I hope it was fun and useful. So I'll just hang out here and see if there's any other questions or any other comments that people want to make. Is there an estimate of when the North Texas competition schedule and league assignments will be released? So, Lon, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to give my standard spiel?
Not before kickoff.
Right. So, typically, the way it's happened in the past is, we're still solidifying the competition. Or Lon is still solidifying what the venues are, what the competition schedule will be, and so on. And league assignments come after the competition schedule is published. So there's a schedule that's published that says these are available leagues. Teams are then allowed to specify their preferences for what leagues they would prefer to be a part of. And then there's a magical assignment that happens, and then teams are told which of their preferences they got. But that doesn't happen until the round kickoff. So at least a month away or so before, in North Texas, before the competition schedule gets published and is made available for teams to figure out where they would like to compete. So as it's been in previous years, usually in September. Sometime in September is when that starts happening.
Yeah, the school year is just starting. I mean, I don't contact my league commissioners until August, which would have been today if it weren't for this chat clinic. But, other regions, they publish their schedule the semester before the summer. That's something we'll strive for in the future. But, our release of the schedule here in North Texas is way earlier than it had been in years past. So you'll have plenty of time to make the plans for the buses, and you'll get to pick your league based on location and dates like we always have. You're able to change your league. I don't assign you leagues. You pick your top 3 choices. I give you one of your top 3 choices. Well, so I do assign you a league, but I don't automatically assign you a league. You got to sign up for them.
So very good question. And we'll hear much more about it as we get closer to kickoff.
I think it went really well.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, this was fun to put together. I love putting these together. I'm gonna work much harder this season to make sure that they make it to YouTube. But simulcasting to YouTube is definitely helping in this case.
Well, reading all the rules yesterday evening was like, okay, I bet they're going to talk about. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
All
I think
right.
it's the earliest chat clinic you've ever done.
It's certainly up there. Certainly, I might have done one in early August before, but I don't think ever on August 1st.
Yeah, was this one of the largest ones we've ever had too?
I think I might have done chat clinics this early in 2020 because that was the COVID season, and we did a series of CAD clinics that was introducing people to CAD, which is a very good preseason activity. So I might have done one earlier in 2020, but that would be the only time. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for coming. I'm going to see about closing things down, I think. Thank you, and have a good night. And we look forward to seeing you at future workshops, future clinics, and definitely kickoffs and events in the upcoming season. Let's go first.